Hi there, folks. We'll get started at the top of the hour in about 8 minutes. I just want to know if folks can hear me. If you can, just in the chat box, just let me know.
We can hear you, Tom.
Great. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. Our co-host, we have a co-host on, Sierra, who can, she's going to give you some information about where you can access this webinar on our website, where we catalog them, and other webinars as well. She can also help you if you have any kind of technical questions or, non-content related questions too. Okay. Let's see. Okay. As we go along, if you have questions, that's fine. But just go ahead and type them in the question and answer box so you don't forget them. But I won't get to the questions until the end. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. This is chapter 2, the literature review. Our model of the dissertation is based on the it's fairly typical social sciences 5-chapter model, where chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is the literature review, chapter 3 you describe your methods, chapter 4 is the results, chapter 5 is the discussion of the results. Now there are some variations on that. Some models have more chapters, but usually the content is pretty much the same. Sometimes they'll split like one chapter into 2 chapters, but the 5-chapter model is pretty standard. Okay, here are the things we're going to be covering today. This is kind of a general overview of the literature review and its purpose. It includes a little bit of discussion of some of the the major components of the lit review. So yeah, let's just kind of pull out for a second to kind of get a larger sense of how the lit review fits into the study, and to talk a little bit about its purpose. Because I think if you understand the larger purpose of it, it helps you to kind of tackle the lit review the way it, or address the lit review the way it should be. So the literature review is, as it sounds, it's a review of the literature or the research, and more specifically the peer-reviewed research on your topic. And it's not just to kind of review the literature and to show your readers what's out there. I mean, that is part of it. But also the kind of the larger purpose is to highlight and to accentuate your research problem, right, that drives your study, and to help make an argument for the need for your study. So in reviewing the literature that's related to your topic, part of what you're doing is noting inconsistencies and noting shortcomings of studies in the research, noting what people have done, but also what they haven't done, and at the same time kind of highlighting the need for your own study based on that. So that's kind of the larger purpose, right? Just to kind of to reinforce why your study is needed, and to reinforce, to make an argument for your research problem. Okay. So here are the sections we'll be covering: the introduction, literature search strategy, theoretical framework, review of the literature, which is the bulk of the lit review, which is probably about 80% of it in a summary. Before we go any farther, and you're going to hear me say this a couple times, or more than that probably throughout the presentation, always obtain your school's template, right? For all the chapters. The template guides you as far as what headers go into the chapters, what content goes into in each section, and ours is based on, we have a pretty general template that's pretty transferable. It's just that your school sometimes may have different variations on that, and you definitely want to follow specifically what your school is looking for. Having said that, our general template will again act as a pretty good general guide. Okay. So the introduction to the lit review, really what you want to do is restate the purpose of your study. You kind of like the introduction to all chapters, you're really kind of reorienting your reader, right? So to do that, you want to restate the purpose of your study, remind the reader of why you're conducting your study, of why it's important. And you can, if you want, preview contents of the chapter that are to come if you want to. And that's a pretty cut and dried introduction. It doesn't need to be long. Probably, that's less than a page. It's maybe a paragraph or a solid paragraph or 2 paragraphs. But again, obtain your school's template. Your school may want a little more or a little something different, but this is pretty standard. Okay. The literature search strategy typically comes next. Sometimes it's called methods of searching, but the idea is the same. This is the section where you basically describe how you searched and what you searched, your process for locating material for your lit review. And this is important. Again, it's not a long section, but it's kind of important in the sense that your professors want to know that you have conducted a comprehensive search. Well, how do you let them know that? Do you just say, hey, yeah, I conducted a comprehensive search? Well, they want to see that you did. So this is basically showing them that you did. How do you do that? First just start off with a pretty simple declarative sentence that talking about the library you use. First of all, like a comprehensive search for relevant material was conducted using so-and-so university's library or so-and-so university library's online portal, which is usually the case. You're going through online. And then you want to list, the databases that you searched, any search tools that were used. So, databases specifically that are related to your area of study, right? If you're in education, ERIC, ERIC, that's an acronym. ERIC is a big database. If you're in business, there's business databases. So any kind of databases that you searched, any search tools that you use. Search tools are like Google Scholar, which is, it searches multiple databases for you. And those are nice because you get a lot of breadth that way. Things like Academic Source Complete, Academic Source Premier, those are the same things. They're these kind of big search tools that search multiple databases. So any kind of, your databases, search tools used, list those. Here's what you use. Here's the databases you search. Here's the search tools you used. Sometimes you need to get really specific and include specialized journals in your field, or sometimes your chair asks you to, hey, make sure you look at this journal. If you search any specialized journals, put that in there. You want to include your key terms that you use to search and the combinations of terms that you use for your search. And these are not going to be any surprise because they're going to be, your major, they're going to correspond to your major factors or your major variables that you're studying, or the major concepts in your study, right? But you should list those. And this last section is pretty important. You want to discuss any ways that you kind of filtered or qualified your search. So for example, if you only wanted, and there are options, right? There are options when you go into this, when you're searching in your school's library. There's going to be options for you only want English only articles to be returned. Or if you only want full text articles to be returned, you can click, they have boxes, they have choices for that. But the next two are more important. Things like date of publication, right? So again, here's where you need to check with your, because this is going to be important and it can save you time in the long run. You need to check with your template or your chair about the publication dates that they want material to be included in your lit review. So in other words, they may just want material from now published within 5 years, which is typical for some schools. Some schools, require 5 to 7 years. They give you more of a window. Some schools it's 10 years, right, from now. Some schools, they don't give you any limitations. But it's important if you're going to school that so, most of the material in your lit review needs to be published within 5 years. We'll say you don't know that because you didn't kind of, get the template. And so you start putting in a lot of stuff that's past 5 years, it's older than 5 years, where you're probably going to have to go back and update that material. So that's why it's good to know, what's on your template and what's required. So if there is some kind of stipulation of requirements about that in your template, you want to include that in this literature search strategy section that you included primarily, sources within that time frame that your school is looking for. For example, 2015 to the present, or whatever their time frame is they give you. Now, can you put in older material? You can, because foundational studies, if something's really foundational, you can include that if it's important. Sometimes theoretical material, theories take longer to develop. So theoretical material, sometimes you get a pass for that being older. But if you do have those kind of publication, time requirements, you want to stick within those as best you can. And the last one's real important: peer-reviewed academic articles. That's really the gold standard for the lit review. You don't want to be reviewing non-peer-reviewed sources, just period. You want to know that your sources are peer-reviewed, that they're academically rigorous. You can bring in some material from websites or material like that if it's just kind of statistics, if it's just kind of informational. But the material that you actually want to be digging into and reviewing it needs to be peer reviewed. That's why you can use books, but they should probably be used sparingly. And again, most of it is that you want to be reviewing is the peer reviewed academic article. How do you know if something's peer reviewed? Well, the easiest way is when you're searching, there will be an option that says, return to me, only material that's peer reviewed. And when you see, and also when you pull something up, an article, and it gives you the bibliographic information, the author, the date of publication, the title, it should also say right there too, whether it's peer reviewed. But you want to, again, include that in your literature search strategy, your description of your search, that you included primarily material that was peer reviewed. Okay, and for all of the dissertation, but especially some of these sections like this that you're kind of maybe unsure what goes into it, obtain an example of a dissertation from your school. In an area kind of close to yours, kind of what you're doing, or from your chair, that your chair has already approved somebody else's dissertation. Get an example or two. It's helpful to see how people have handled some of these sections. And that you can use your resources. You can go to webinars, you can look things up on the internet, and it's all helpful. But sometimes when you sit down to write, there's just there's nothing better than to have an example at hand. Okay. So next is the theoretical framework. Again, consult your specific template for your school. The theoretical framework, sometimes it appears only in chapter 1. Sometimes it appears only in chapter 2. Sometimes it appears in chapter 1, and you elaborate on it more in chapter 2. That's more typical that it appears in both 1 and 2, but just double check your specific school. But if it does require it in chapter 2, it usually goes here at the beginning of, before you start reviewing the information, the articles. A couple of questions here. First of all, theoretical framework or conceptual framework. I don't know if you may have seen the terms, put your theoretical or your conceptual framework here. What's the difference? What should I use? I take a real practical approach to this one, which is theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies, and conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. So that should help you out right there. As far as mixed methods, do you need both a theoretical and a conceptual? Maybe. It would kind of depend. If your mixed method study is, weighted equally for, each component has kind of equal weight in the study, you might need a theoretical and a conceptual framework. If you have a mixed method study that's primarily quantitative and you just have some qualitative questions to kind of help shed some more light on the quantitative portion, you could probably just get away with a theoretical framework. So mixed methods doesn't necessarily mean you need both, but you might. Okay. So yeah, in most cases, you'll have a theoretical framework in chapter 1 where you kind of lay it out a little bit, you discuss what you're going to use, and then in chapter 2, it's kind of a more elaborate discussion of the theoretical framework. So what does it look like? What is your theoretical framework? What do you do here? Again, this is where examples help, but really, you just want to, again, first start off with, let's say, emotional intelligence, theory of emotional intelligence. The theory of emotional intelligence will be used, will serve as the theoretical framework for this study. Have a citation after that. Talk a little bit about who developed the theory. Again, have the year. To explain what, right? Theories are developed to explain things. That's what theories do. They help us explain things. So who developed the theory? Why did they develop it? What did they develop it to explain? Define the theory. This is real important. Sometimes people go off and start, discussing the theory and all different kinds of things, but they never stop and define it. What does the theory, what does it mean? If there's any associated components to the theory, and there usually are, they have, parts to them that are relevant to your study, you want to stop and explain the components, right? Define those. Talk a little bit about what other researchers have used the theory for. And this is important, how, the theory connects to your study. In other words, how is the theory going to help explain what you're doing? All right. Let's see. So for quantitative studies, usually, I mean, this is a section that kind of throws people, and I get it. It's kind of, what is a theoretical framework? What do I put here? What are they looking for? But once you kind of get your head around it, it's not as difficult as it first appears. And for quantitative studies, sometimes it's really pretty simple in the sense that, let's say we're doing a study on emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. I know these are two big constructs. What would your theoretical framework consist of? Well, it would consist of a theory of emotional intelligence and a theory of transformational leadership, right? Since you have these two constructs that you're looking at, you're going to measure the relationship between them or something. You would need a theory for each one, right? And so your framework would be composed of those two theories. That sounds simple enough, right? As long as you do the other stuff, you define what they are, you talk a little bit about what they were developed for, what researchers have used them for. The other part, again, this is for the quantitative study, is look to your instruments, right? So the instrument that you're using, for example, to measure emotional intelligence. Okay, there's I don't know how many there are, but there's several, right? So you're going to choose one that best fits your study, that best fits what you want to measure, what you're looking at. Okay, so let's say you've chosen Goleman's theory. He's a big name in emotional intelligence. Goleman. So you're going to use Goleman's instrument. I'm sorry, Goleman's instrument to measure emotional intelligence. Well, then you want to, for your theoretical framework, you don't want to use Baron, who's another emotional intelligence researcher. You don't want to use Baron's theory if you're using Goleman's instrument. You see what I mean? So Goleman likely has his own theory. Now the theories will be a little different, right? Because they may focus on highlight different things than the other ones. So if you're using Goleman's instrument, you want to use Goleman's theoretical foundations, right? Because these instruments aren't developed from thin air. You know, the instruments have theoretical foundations, right? So Goleman's instrument, Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence. Okay, and same thing for transformational leadership. So that should, you know, if you're doing a quant study, that should help kind of guide you toward, you know, the theories that you need to be using. For conceptual framework, it's similar. It's just a little different in the sense that you might not be dealing with a full-blown theory. You know, your research may be kind of more exploratory. You're asking people questions. You're digging in depth into the topic. You might not have a theory that kind of, you know, umbrellas what you're doing. So you would use the major concepts that you're looking at that would compose your conceptual framework. But the definitions of your concepts and how you're going to use them in your study need to come from the literature, right? So same kind of idea. And of course, you don't have likely won't have an instrument if you're doing a qualitative study, but the conceptual framework will include your major concepts that you're looking at. Again, based on major concepts as they come from the literature and the definition from the literature of how you want to define those concepts in your study. All right, that's kind of generally the theoretical framework. How long is it? Could be a few pages. Sometimes chairs want you to bring in some recent studies that have used the theories to show that it's still being used and to show how researchers have used it. That might add some more pages to it. So maybe a few pages, probably. Okay, but this is a good section really to look at, you know, other people's examples. Okay, the review of the literature. This is the next section, and this is the bulk of it, right? This is what it's called the lit review, and this is where you're reviewing the lit. So yeah, I'd say this is about 80% of the chapter. See how long, again, check your template. It said, I told you I was going to tell you this several times. See how long your lit review needs to be. Some schools have requirements, some schools don't. I've seen 10-page lit reviews. I've seen 80-page lit reviews. Usually the sweet spot is about 25 to 30 pages. But again, so if your chair or your school wants something different, you should know before going in. So what do you do here? You're going to have a lot of research, have a lot of material. You're going to feel like you're just drowning in studies and details and you don't know what to do with it. This is just to remember the focus of your study, right? If it's emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, well, there are your two big organizing factors right there. right? I mean, you want to follow the factors of your study. This is a focused, this is not a discussion like the lit review. Some people think it's just kind of a general discussion. It's not. It needs to focus on what you're doing in your study. So your major factors, your variables, those are going to kind of drive or dictate kind of the organization of this part of the lit review, right? You're going to want to have a section on emotional intelligence. You're going to want to have a section on transformational leadership. You're probably going to want to have subsections under those, right? Because what you start finding in the literature, you'll start seeing trends, right? And this is, you can't see what that is until you see what's in the literature. So under emotional intelligence, give a definition of emotional intelligence, why it's important. Then start, see what the research is showing you. If there's certain trends emerging from the research, use those as subheaders, right? And what you want to start doing, so reviewing the literature involves what? It partially involves synthesis, it partially involves analysis. We'll get that here. Okay, and synthesis, synthesis just means to combine things into a whole, combine parts into a whole, right? And the best place to start thinking about organization is at the paragraph level. I mean, that's really the kind of foundational organizational piece. Right, then it goes up to subsections and then sections, because you're going to have to, you're going to want to get your organization kind of down, and it might change a little bit as you go through, but you need an organizing principle as you go through, and this is why an outline might help. But at the level of the paragraph, just let's all go back to middle school or wherever we learned it. It seems sometimes when people they get like a lot of information, like you have with a lit review, suddenly they forget, oh my God, they're just putting stuff down and they, they don't know what to do with it. And I get it. It can be overwhelming, but just, take a breath, remember, these foundational organizational principles, and especially at the paragraph level, topic sentence, right? Evidence or discussion of the topic, several sentences. That's the meat of the paragraph. And a summary sentence or transitions to the next topic, right? Because some profs will ring you up for this. They'll say, I'm sorry, they'll say follow the meal plan, and meal is an acronym. It's just an organizational strategy for paragraphs. And this is where you also want to include the details from the studies, right? When you're synthesizing, you're bringing in points from the studies or details from the studies to help make your points in the paragraph. So let's look at an example. So here's an example of synthesis at the paragraph level, bringing in points from different studies to make a coherent paragraph. Sorry about the dogs working from home. Okay, so we got it color coded here. Yellow is the topic sentence. Green is all the evidence supporting the topic sentence. And the teal is the summary sentence. So I'm not going to read it all to you, but I want to point out a couple things here. So we have details from the studies. We're bringing together these different studies to make a point. So that's synthesis, but if you notice, there's a little analysis in here too. So I said, recent research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. So that word mostly there is key, and I'll get down to it in a minute. So the first couple examples, they support that. And then when I get down to, this is about 4 lines up from the bottom. It says, unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. Okay, so there's some analysis right there, right? We have one study here that doesn't align with the other ones. And so that's why I said mostly in the first sentence up there, right? Mostly, not all of it, but most of it does. We have this one that doesn't support the rest, doesn't fit in with the rest. And there's a possible explanation there, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So that's some analysis, right? It's kind of stating why this study may not have aligned with the findings of the other study. So that's some analysis. And then again, at the last sentence kind of reiterates that empirical evidence from recent research largely supports. So there's that qualifier largely there. Okay. So then you would move on to the next point you wanted to make and do basically the same thing. And these would fall under, subtopic categories and topic categories sections within the lit review. But this is where you need to start, thinking about, organization at the paragraph level, as well as, like I said, the sections themselves based on your factors, based on your major concepts. Okay, analysis, and we talked a little bit about this just a few seconds ago when we were talking about analysis in the paragraph. So you kind of analyze going through it. You don't have like a separate section for analysis. The kind of analysis is kind of built in throughout it. So you're not just kind of reporting on information. You're not just giving information, right? That's part of it. Part of it is the synthesis and the reviewing, but there's analysis in there too. What's that mean? Note any shortcomings of the studies, note gaps, things that people aren't focusing on, weaknesses of studies, note also trends in the research. Okay. And wherever you can, where these gaps are and these weaknesses are, try to tie that into what you're doing, right? Because remember, the larger argument that the lit review is making is the need for your study and the importance of your research problem. So, wherever you can, reiterate what you're doing in your study. Reiterate the research problem and the need for your study where you can. Again, the whole thing kind of culminates in an argument for why you're doing your study. Okay, and then the summary. And I know that's kind of a lot to cover, but all the lit reviews are different, right? They're all going to contain different information. They're all going to contain different studies. But that's kind of the general approach that you want to take to the lit review. Okay, for the summary, you want to recap major points from the chapter. Again, just like any summary. But you also, for this, you want to remind the reader of the research problem based on what is in the literature and what's not in the literature. So that's where the kind of analysis comes in that we're talking about. You're right, and reiterate the need for your study. Okay, this is who we are. Editing, consulting, support, statistics, help, and this is our contact information. So, feel free to contact us if, just to see what we offer, see if it's right for you. And if you have any questions now, let me know and I'll try to answer them. Any questions? Everybody's good on the lit review? Any tips for diving into the research, organizational tips? For diving into the research? Yeah, I mean, you don't just kind of dive in, right? You're going to be, at this point, because, you know, you have your, well, it depends. Some chairs want you to start with chapter 1, some chairs want you to start with chapter 2, but you should have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. So it shouldn't be, you should be past the point of general research, right? So this is more targeted research. You know, you have your factors, your variables. If it's quant, you have your major concepts. If it's qual, those are where you, that's where you go, right? I mean, you follow your major topics. Any organizational tips for while you're researching? Yeah, it's you know, check out something like Zotero. There's other kind of reference, you know, reference helpers, you know, citation helpers. You want to kind of keep track of the information not the information, the articles you pull, you know, or maybe have a couple lists, like ones that you've used, ones that you might use, but you, in other words, you want to kind of keep track as you go along, things that you include in your lit review, and maybe something you take out, or you're not going to use it, you're going to take it out, because that's going to matter for your references page. Remember, you got to put together a references section, and you should be kind of keeping up with that, because it's going to be a real pain in the neck if, you know, you don't, and at the end, you have to have, you know, your references section and you haven't been paying, you know, keeping up with it. So yeah, as you go, and the chapter 2 has a lot of citations in it. So as you go along, yeah, keep track of, you know, what you take out of the lit review or the study in general, what you put in. So, you know, keep lists of that. And also, like I said, Zotero is one. There's other ones. They're kind of like citation managers, really, reference managers. So I don't know if that helps. But. Okay, anything else about the chapter 2? And it's a bear of a chapter. And I'm not gonna lie about that. But you know, work closely with your chair, your people. You know, get help, or just use your resources. You know, and it's going to be a chapter where it's just going to involve some perseverance. Okay, any other questions about the lit review? All right, well, if that's it, I'm going to let everybody go. Hope you have a great rest of your day. All right, thank you for coming, everybody. You're welcome. You're welcome.